Hello and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk About Fostering. Today I'm joined by the lovely Nikita, who's come to talk to us about why matching children and young people with the right families is so important. Nikita was in care between the ages of 9 and 17 and now uses her knowledge and experience to help match children with families for the best chances of stability and long-term foster homes, which allows children and young people to thrive. When a child comes into care, what happens? What happens to that young person? What does their journey through the system, if you like, look like from when they enter care and throughout their time in care?
So usually the process is that a social worker is allocated to the child. Once that social worker is allocated to the child and all the assessments and whatever needs to be done, that social worker will write something called a referral. That referral is given to the local authority commissioning team. Okay. Referrals teams kind of combined with the local authority. Now they reach out to agencies across the nation with this referral and ask the fostering agencies referrals officers, do you have a match for this child? And they will give us additional information of what sort of home are we looking for this child, because there's many different options for this young person. It's, as I said, like residential, fostering, so there's a variation of options, and we will then match that young person to those options. And then once we've kind of had meetings and got queries and, went back and forth between the local authority and the foster parent, once everybody's at a place where we're all happy, then that young person will be placed, for example, with that foster parent.
Okay.
And that's kind of how the child or young person goes from coming into care and ending up at a foster parent. But we're the people that you don't see, because when I was younger, I used to moan at my social worker, because I used to say, like, you're putting me in this house, and they're like, well, it's not me. But at the time you think it's your social worker, but it's not. It's actually their commissioning team, because the referral gets passed down to them. The social worker just writes the referral. So we're the people that you don't see that are placing the young people in these with foster parents, or in the variation of options.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, what is a referral?
A referral is what is given to a referrals officer, like myself, yes, from the local authority, which gives us information regarding a young person, which we then use to find a suitable home for.
In kind of the most basic terms, a referral is almost like a fact file of a young person that gets shared with the right teams, information on them. The referral itself is the document or the action of finding all this information about the child, putting it on the document, and then physically referring them to someone like you, who then goes off and looks for a right match.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
What sort of information do you get about children on their referral?
Each referral from the local authorities are different. They all have their own different way of how they want their referrals to look. But on a standard referral, you have events that may have taken place in that child's life, which is important to know. You usually have like a family background, history of the child, you have schooling, health, you have all of the kind of finer details, reasons to why they're in care. They have like additional sections which may talk about the specifics of the young person, which could be like a disability, or anything that we need to know to let the foster parents know. Referrals can be quite large, a couple of pages sometimes. Sometimes there's so many significant events that we would need to be aware of. And then you get referrals that are like, for example, you ask referrals unaccompanied asylum seeking children, and when they come into the country, we barely know anything about them, so their referrals are pretty short, and just have basic information and maybe a little bit of history of how they entered the country.
Wow.
But we really just know name and age, and that's pretty much it.
Even if a child say was born here, you might still end up with really little information if it was an emergency or something like that. So how do you handle that situation in your job when you've got so little to play with, but you need to get the child placed ASAP?
I'm quite good at asking questions. So, we've got really good relationships with some of the teams in the local authorities. So I will literally try and go back and ask as many questions as I can possible, because it is important for the foster parent to know as much as possible. But I always let them know that sometimes you may not know everything. And that's why we kind of usually have meetings to try and get more information. But in something like an emergency, you wouldn't really have that information to hand probably till the next morning or even a few days. But as long as we kind of know anything significant, then it's we're kind of okay,
Make do.
We can do, yeah.
What about the matching process? What sort of things are you looking for to best place a child with a family?
Within ACS, we look at cultural and religious matching. However, there's also additional stuff that needs looking at. I look at the needs of a child, what they want. I think that's important. It's usually things like they don't want to be placed with animals, or they would like to be near their friends. They would like to be kept close to family because of contact reasoning. So that usually in a referral is a section where a young person has a chance to voice their opinion on what they want. So sometimes I am still looking at culture and religion, but those are the things I'm focusing on as well, because I even sometimes will maybe sit there and think, well, actually, for religious and cultural reasons, these foster parent matches, but they don't match for the child's needs and wants, which is the most important thing before anything. So I look at those things and I try to do my absolute best to match them to the foster parent, also because the foster parent also has needs and wants and things like that. We sometimes have conversations with foster parents to see how we can adapt those child's needs and wants into the foster parent's life, because sometimes the foster parent may have that they don't have animals. This young person wants an animal. So we'll have the conversation about, actually, would you be open to having a cat or a dog, and this young person would really like it? And lots of times foster parents say, oh, yeah, I've never thought about that. That's great. Do they have one? Are they going to bring one with them? And that's another way that we've looked at a child's needs and wants, which is important. And that creates another good match, which we put then to the local authority.
Is there argument to say that if the match is good, a young person will stay in that home for longer? Is that what you're trying to achieve?
What I would like to achieve, but that doesn't always happen, because people grow, people progress, people's needs and wants change. And at that time, we could potentially looking at a 7-year-old, and before you know, we look at the same child and they're now 15. Their needs and wants have changed. I also feel that somebody who fosters, hundreds of children, that is amazing, to achieve. However, somebody that's had 2 children, for example, in the same, have been there since, let's say from like 5 to 15, is still amazing. And we still need to, give those foster parents a pat on the back, because it also shows that you haven't given up. Because I know there's been things where you've probably felt like, I may not be able to carry on with these young people. There has been some challenges probably there, and I know that you just haven't gave up, so it shows the resilience, so still credit those foster parents, and that's kind of what we want. We don't want a placement breakdown. And not saying that the foster parent that had hundreds of children had breakdowns, but if we're seeing a large amount of children entering and leaving a home, then we do have to question, are these breakdowns? Then as a referral officer, every time a young person leaves, I will look at the placement with the social worker, and we will decide was this suitable? Is there anything that we could have looked for more? If we did, what have we done well here? And we'll have a look at all those bits. So for next time, when we are matching with those foster parents, or we are matching with other young people, we take those things into consideration, because we do not want placement breakdowns, but you technically can't prevent them either.
No, and it's kind of a natural part of fostering.
Yes, it is,
So firstly, a breakdown, that's when a foster placement is unsuccessful? What sort of reasons do you see breakdowns for?
A lot of the times there are behaviour because, like I said, people grow and people change. Sometimes it's independence. Children move on to independence. So we wouldn't necessarily call that a breakdown. That would be planned, but at the same time, it's still a young person that has left. It could be that they need to move closer to school. It's maybe to move closer to family because sometimes young people are moved out of area. So sometimes a placement has to come to an end because we need to move that child back.
A lot of people say they couldn't foster because they couldn't say goodbye and they'd find that too emotionally draining. But ultimately, if the match is good, and of course there are breakdowns and that's unavoidable and that is a natural part of fostering. However, sometimes, like we do have stories where a young person has been in a home for 10, 2, 3, 5, 10 plus years. They're an adult and they're still coming home for tea.
Yeah,
that does happen.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and is that for you why matching is so important? Does it give that like longevity to a relationship?
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of young people miss out on. They don't have those types of relationships. A lot of, it's like a lot of people come into care because they don't have those relationships around them. Yeah. And I think that if we're able to build that, that is important because I think when children turn, post 16 into the semi-independent stage, they're kind of left to be by themselves. Now, what we want is we do want children to come back to their foster parents and have dinner. I still speak to my foster parents on the phone because I've had that relationship with them. I've lived with them. They've kind of grew me up. They know about, they know about me, and those are the most important relationships to keep. So we do encourage that as well, and I think it's important for the young person to have that.
We don't only find children homes for their care needs or their personality, but we also look into matching children by their faith and their culture as well. Why is that such an important thing for children and young people in care? Because I think a lot of people don't really think, you probably just think, oh, child needs home, but actually faith, culture, heritage, all of that stuff is really important. Why is that?
I think it gives the child a sense of belonging. And I think it was something that was really missed for a long time. And, me growing up in care myself, I understood that I needed someone who also understood the needs that I have. And it's okay, I think, going about and, learning and doing training, but it's just that if the children are culture matched, like I said, it's about a sense of belonging, identity needs. And I'm not trying to say that you can't get that for a transsocial placement because you can, it has worked.
Yeah.
But if we can culture match a child for, for cultural religious needs, I know that child will appreciate having someone understanding their needs. You do get some children which say they're not bothered whether they're culture matched or not.
Okay.
And that's usually the older children who already know who they are, can already, have an understanding of their own identity and their culture and beliefs and stuff, and don't really need anyone to support them with that. But there is children out there that have moved so much they don't know who they are and they don't know their identity, and it's really hard to try and learn someone that when, do you know what I mean? If it's better if somebody has the same, is a culture match to yourself.
It's maybe little things that you grow, if you grow up you're born into a household and you stay in that household, they're things that you probably just take for granted because you don't even realize that is a tradition, or that's a way of doing things, or that's the food that you eat, or that's the way that you practice your religion. And then as soon as that's taken away from you, who am I? What am I doing?
I think it's a way of life for some people, and I also feel like we shouldn't take that away from children just because they're in care.
Give me an idea of how many referrals from local authorities you might look at every day.
I can look up to anything to about maybe 100 referrals a day. Some of those referrals are not just newly children placed into care. They could be referrals from last week where they're still looking for homes for children. Okay. They could be something what we call a step down, which is children that are already in residential settings that are now they want to place in a foster home with a foster parent. So there's kind of lots of different types of referrals, specialist referrals as well, where they're probably looking for someone with specific training, if the child has additional needs and things like that. Children come into care for lots of different reasons. It can be, for example, you ask young people that come into the country, they've got no family members half the time, or they've got, there's nobody that can support them and be able to look after them. So that's one reason. If you drop down today, or you fall ill and you haven't got that family support, the young person is more likely to go into care. Children sometimes come into care of respite reasons because mum's in hospital or dad's in hospital. Marriage issues, children come into care for. Yeah.
So that people's lives really just getting in the way and backup is needed to care for those children.
Yeah, it's always these really negative, horrible reasonings people think you should. And yes, a lot of children are in care for those reasons. However, there are sometimes reasons that are quite simple and can happen to any of us.
So when people might think, let's assume there's this stigma or this judgment, actually, how far away is your child from potentially ending up in care if something happened to you? Have you got a solid enough support network around you that your child would be cared for? So the point is, it could happen to anyone for any number of circumstances. Like, things just might all go terribly. Oh my goodness, there's no one available. Care. Like, it could be like that, but people might think, well, that would never happen to me or my family, or like that sort of.
And even if you have got a solid big family, even if that happens to me, they can go to a family. No, because what if those families fail those assessments? Then you have to think that that's potential reasoning why that young person can actually end up into care. Could have the solidest family that you could ever think of, could come from a perfect or great financial background, nothing to worry about, and boom, you fail those assessments. That's the young person then has to go into care. So sometimes it can be for reasons just like that. Yeah.
Your care experience obviously gives you a very, very unique and valuable insight that, you can speak the language of the foster parent, you can speak the language of the children, young people, you're a parent yourself, you kind of sit in all of these camps. A lot of care experience people I've spoken to, and that might be kids in care now, so like teenagers you're in care now, or people who are on staying put, so they might be 18, 19, 20, early 20s and still living with their foster families, which is obviously very, very lovely. But they often will say, I know that the staff have got my best interests at heart, but until you've lived this, you really don't know. So, and they can feel quite not sure, not heard, not understood.
I think it's the understanding part. To actually understand and have been through these young people's trauma touches a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And that, as young people say, oh, you don't understand me, and so on and so on. And I think when they find somebody who's still quite young and has lived through that same experience, a lot of the time it being traumatic, I think then they warm to you better.
If you could share a message directly with the children and young people that you are matching every day, what would it be? What do you wish that kids out there in care today knew about maybe you working behind the scenes? What would you say to them?
I would say speak as loud as possible. Even if you don't think you're going to get anywhere with your voice or your views, please shout from the rooftops. It's so important because eventually someone will hear you. It might not be in the circle that you have today, but I hope that I can, and I hope there's somebody else up there that will hear that young person. Their voice is so important in so many ways, especially in care. And a lot of children don't speak up because they feel like they have no voice, but you definitely do, and keep speaking up. I think that is my,
number one
message. Yeah.
We ask everyone the same question to close out the Let's Talk About Fostering podcast, which is, do you have a favourite memory, a favourite moment, something that sits with you always as this is why I work in referrals, or something about your fostering journey that is just a moment that you always remember that's really important to you?
We do the appreciation awards every year for foster parents and children, usually separate. And I remember when I first come into the role and we done our first children appreciation awards, And this was probably the first time I'd seen any of the young people. Half of them were placed before I'd come here.
Yeah.
But a few of them were placed when I'd come into the role. I'd placed these young people. And it was seeing them, seeing their faces. When we talk about our event for the year, it was, we need to do a party. We need them to have fun. And when I was seeing them at the appreciation award, having fun, getting to know them, they were mingling with my, my daughter. They took her and just went out. It was, it was the most, it was kind of a rewarding experience. I'd seen them all get the rewards as well of, the young people getting their awards and all of them playing and just photo booth. And it was like, this is how it's meant to be. What you're doing now, those smiles, the laughter. I'm really big for like making memories, laughing, all the rest of it.
Having a good time.
Yeah, having a good time. Like, it was kind of, we can leave all that trauma at the door for a second and we can just kind of enjoy ourselves. That probably for me was like, oh, I kind of gotta stay. Do you know what I mean? I gotta be here. Like, that was enough for me to be here. Yeah.
When you just see a child enjoying themselves, all that it feels like so basic. Playing, walking the dog, seeing something for the first time, go on holiday for the first time, all those experiences that so many of us take for granted. And when you can actually give that to someone for the first time, it becomes a magical.
Yeah.
Amazing. Nikita, thank you so much for sharing your experiences today. You are so welcome. To our listeners, as always, we hope that you learned something about fostering, whether that's what matching is all about, why faith and culture is so important in the world of fostering, or even just a little bit more about what we do here at Polaris. We hope through every episode that we can break down some of the barriers to fostering by sharing stories from the people who live and breathe it every single day. If you'd like to find out more about fostering, please get in touch. You can find out about all the support available in your area with our agencies by checking out the links in the description. Make sure you follow, subscribe, or like our podcast so you never miss an episode of Let's Talk About Fostering. See you next time.